Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are remaining in San Diego. We're going to talk print journalism, and we're going to talk about writing commentaries for a newspaper and being a member of the editorial board. Our guest is Bella Ross. She attended San Diego State from 2016 through 2020, which means that she graduated right when COVID happened and took us all for quite the loop. She is currently an audience engagement editor for the San Diego Union-Tribune. She also writes commentaries. Again, she's a member of the editorial board. Bella, welcome to the Where You At podcast. It's great to meet you.
Oh, it's great to meet you. Thanks so much for having me.
So these are always fun for me, no matter who I interview, but especially when it's someone who is an editor-in-chief of the Daily Aztec. I feel a special kinship. Bella was the editor-in-chief her final year. I was also the editor-in-chief of the Daily Aztec for my final year. And I really don't want to say what year it was because it was a long time ago. So I feel this kinship, Bella, and so I'm excited to learn about your experiences, not just on campus, but at the campus newspaper and how that influenced your career and kind of what the similarities were, even if we were decades apart in our time there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even just like in the 10 years before me, from what I've heard from past editor-in-chiefs and other administrators on campus, things changed so much. Like, there was times where staff writers were paid. Unfortunately, that is not a situation anymore. But even just a few years before me, people were getting paid for stories. Like, it was just a very different situation. Obviously, the student newspaper does the best that it can, but it's a student newspaper. All newspapers really struggle financially. So I definitely dealt with a lot of that. But it was just like such an interesting experience. And then especially second semester when COVID happened, because I had to make I guess unprecedented isn't really a term that, everything felt unprecedented for so long. But it was very unprecedented at the time to have to halt print production. That was very upsetting for my staff. We had some special sections that we had been planning and things along those lines, and having to do that and, not come back, kind of unknowingly publish the last paper that I would publish for the Daily Aztec was just such an interesting experience. I mean, it all, I guess, worked out as well as it could have worked out in the end. It definitely interrupted things quite profoundly, but I think we all, for the most part, landed on our feet and learned a lot from that experience on how to be, nimble in the light of challenges.
Let's rewind a little bit. This has become my favorite question to ask guests on this podcast. What is it about writing that drew you in? What is it about writing that just spoke to you that made you decide you wanted to do this?
Oh, that's so interesting. I think that I've always kind of been a natural writer, in high school and other times throughout my life. I didn't really realize it at the time, maybe, but I could write an essay better than other people could. And I think that for some people it's natural, some people it isn't. I know, I always say, some journalists I feel are more natural reporters and others are more natural writers. They're different skills. I've always felt like I'm a more natural writer, and the reporting is where I've had to really learn and do things that are uncomfortable for me, and go through that process. But I think that I've always been attracted to journalism and writing. And then my first year at State, I was there in 2016. I started when the year Trump got elected. And I don't think I fully understood the expectations of objectivity for journalism during that period of my life. And so first semester, I was literally running around campus with a megaphone, leading protests, after Trump got elected, and just being, your normal inflammatory freshman in college. And I think I realized pretty quickly, I still wanted to do journalism, but I felt like I could have so much more of an impact by cutting through the noise and really explaining what was happening, especially during this such a political time. and still being able to be in the middle of all of that stuff, but like do it in a way that really like set the record straight and informed people. Like I felt like that was like had so much more change making potential than like, you know, running around campus with a megaphone. And so I guess in hindsight, it makes sense that I ended up at Opinion, but for a long time, I was very much doing like news and investigations.
One of the commentaries you wrote for the Union-Tribune, you were discussing your time at the Daily Aztec, and you used this phrase about pestering passersby on campus and scheduling calls with congressional candidates. And I'm curious, especially based on what you just said, how you got over this, I don't know if fear is the right word, but just became more comfortable going up to passersby and pestering them and asking questions so that you could do the reporting side of journalism.
I don't know that I'm fully comfortable with it still, if we're being honest. I mean, so I still have to do this. So a big part of my job these days is like making TikToks, and which like you can't really fake it. Like you gotta, if you want to talk to people, you gotta get out there. Like we're talking visuals, interviews. Like I'm still regularly putting myself in situations, because in college it would always be like, all right, like go on campus and ask people like how they feel about like weed regulation. And like you would just have to ask a bunch of randos about weed regulation, and often get like brushed off by some kid with headphones on. And like that was like always the thing. And you know, I've never like, it's just part of the process. I think that you have to get really comfortable with rejection, and that's something that, you know, I'm still working on, because I still have to go out. Sometimes I'll do man on the street TikTok kind of interviews and like go out into the world and ask people to try to talk to me. But this time I'm putting a camera on their face. So that's an even higher, you know, that's it's a little bit harder to pull off. And, you know, people will often say no. And then I need to take like usually at least 3 minutes to recover from that. And then I just do it again. And then it's, you know, it gets done. But it's just kind of part of the process. It's never been natural for me, but I accepted that it's usually not personal. And like, it's something that like you more or less can get used to. And it also like when it bears fruit, it like really bears fruit. Like seeing those interviews that pan out really well, like really like if this kinds of process like didn't work, then it maybe wouldn't be worth it. And maybe I wouldn't have gone over all of the rejection, but it does work. And so it's all worth it in the end.
I can definitely relate to just the fear of potentially getting rejected, and then just the frustration of being rejected. But also what I think I've learned over the years too is the importance of sample size, and that you need to talk to a quantity number of people anyways in order to get that really good response, or to get a variety of responses, so that the story does not sound like some type of echo chamber. And sometimes that takes a lot more patience and discipline than we might want, especially if we're on deadline, or especially if there's multiple things that we must do in the day. So I can definitely relate. And I think a lot of people can also relate to just finding a way to make sure that you can overcome that in order to lead to those best stories eventually.
Oh, absolutely. And also like being very mindful of like diversity. Like you don't want to talk to like you can go and like on campus maybe and like interview a bunch of people, but then if you walk away at the end, you're like, oh, I only interviewed like white, like 19-year-old boys. Like that's not really like a sample size that like is accurately speaking to things. So being a little bit more intentional about like who you're talking to, and making sure that things are like, you know, you're getting diverse perspectives is like another thing that you have to think about while you're out there. And yeah, a lot to consider. And then I'm just, you know, lingering around for a really long time in an area, and that always feels a little bit weird. The lingering part of it, I think it gets to me. But
I feel like we could talk for hours about all the different Daily Aztec things that we encountered, but also from inside the classroom. What are some of the classes that you took, the professors that had an impact that really helped shape you to become the journalist that you were when you were at San Diego State?
I really appreciated Dana Littlefield's class in particular. She was the public safety editor at the Union-Tribune until very recently. But her class was so interesting. It was a public affairs reporting class, which is kind of my bread and butter. I double majored in journalism and political science, so like very much politics, policy oriented. And she would be teaching class. It was like on a Monday or Tuesday, like 7 to 9. It was a horrible time, but it was because she works full time at the Union-Tribune. And then she would come in the class and she would be like actively managing like a breaking news situation, like an officer involved shooting. like from her phone, and we're just like watching it all happen. Like, I feel like that's the kind of experience that like really is extremely valuable, because we can sit around all day and talk about like media ethics or reporting in this like theoretical sense, which is important and needs to be done. But like at the end of the day, you just need to do the work. You just need to do journalism, and like that's how you learn how to do journalism. And I think that there were a lot of opportunities for that at San Diego State, but that class in particular really stuck with me.
Any other like specific details about that? I mean, would she like say, okay, talks amongst herself, I need to make this call, or is she looking up something like in between grading papers or something? Or I'm trying to figure out just how you manage working on a breaking news story while also teaching a class at the same time. I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always seamless for sure. Like, it was a lot of like typing, and like we'd be in the middle of a lecture, we'd kind of like bounce back and forth, but she would explain what was going on. So it wasn't like it's like, oh, are you just like tweeting or something? Like, it was very clear what was going on, and she would explain it to us. And I have heard situations like in other semesters, like maybe not as much in mine, where she would like really break down like what was happening, and that kind of thing. But I mean, just like on a more of a curriculum level, like she did a lot of like, we each got assigned a city that we basically had to like write stories about and like go to council meetings for. So like I was assigned to hang out in La Jolla and go to like La Jolla community meetings, and that kind of stuff is just like really invaluable. Like, you got to get used to sitting in meetings.
Right.
Like, very important professional skill.
You just reminded me of a crazy memory that I'd kind of forgotten, and that is I had some guest speaker in a journalism class. I have no idea what her name was because it was a really long time ago, but she mentioned going to meetings and how she could always tell when it was about to wrap up because whoever was the leader had this tendency to start flicking his pen back and forth against the desk. And that was her and the other reporters had learned. This is when he's tired of the discussion and he just wants to end this. And so even picking up a little skill like that taught her, that she learned, this is how you pick up on these subtle things in meetings to know, okay, we're going to have action here really fast. So get ready because this thing is wrapping up here.
That's so interesting. See, I haven't like the thing is, I feel like there are so few at this point, like journalists are so overstretched in San Diego in particular, where it's like, I don't know that there's like that many journalists who are like consistently able to like go to meetings like that because they're covering so many different cities, having to go to so many different meetings. This is like, I guess, more of a grim turn, but like this is kind of like the situation that we see ourselves ending up in whenever we're seeing things like what's happening with layoffs and stuff across San Diego media. Like obviously at the Union-Tribune, we've seen it at a bunch of news organizations where people are just stretched so thin that like reporters aren't maybe as easily able to pick up on that kind of stuff that like is really important to understanding what's happening at these kinds of meetings.
So one of the other big stories when you were on campus that you've written about for the Union-Tribune was the story in which the human Aztec Warrior was going to be retired. And so this became the biggest story of the semester or of the year. And you're writing for the Daily Aztec, but it's also part of classroom discussions. And so I'm wondering if you can just reflect on what it's like as a student journalist learning this profession, and you're immediately on the front lines of this huge story.
Yeah, that was such a canon event, honestly. Like, I remember being in the news meeting and I had only written like 3 stories or something, like ever in my life. And we were sitting in the news meeting. They're like, we need somebody to cover this. And nobody was stepping up. And I was like, I'll do it. And they're like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I guess I am. I don't know. And then I went, and then it required me to like literally run across the meeting as it was happening to like get people as they're walking out. It was like a whole situation. Nobody expected that it was going to go that way. Like everybody was shocked. And then of course it's on a Tuesday, which is like the night of production because we were weekly at the time. So I had to write this thing immediately. And then it ends up being the biggest story of the semester. So that was just like, it was such an interesting discussion because, and it also went on for a really long time, controversial on social media, controversial in the classroom, people talking about it. And it kind of introduced me to this whole thing, I guess, where like people are talking about something a lot and you just happen to be the person that's like the most knowledgeable. Like sometimes you almost like have to bite your tongue in conversations to like not be the most annoying person in the room. But also like to genuinely be able to inform people about something that's going on that's important and like did end up getting national attention. So that was like a really weird experience, just because I feel like it kind of introduced me to some of the social realities of being a journalist, and then also just like the impact of being a journalist. Like ultimately, this was just a breaking news story. Like it's not like I investigated or unveiled anything, but like, I just happened to be there. And it could have been anybody who was there who could have relayed this news, but it was me. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of this huge discussion, and it's never stopped since then. So.
It didn't happen to me a lot, but I recall once, twice, maybe 3 times when a professor of mine at San Diego State would say, oh, well, we have the editor-in-chief, the Daily Aztec in the room. So why don't we, and so I remember there was one time I'm like, am I co-teaching this class with you? Or like, who's the teacher? And it was a feeling of both like awkwardness, because suddenly I was on center stage, but it was also a sense of, okay, well, kind of proud. I want to stick my chest out. I was, yeah, I know this, but it was also just awkward. And yet I remember thinking, I better get this right now too, because I'm no longer just this person with lots of time to craft this story and get it out into the paper, but I also need to really make sure that I say this properly in front of my peers in this classroom.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And it would be so funny when I would hang out with people, or I'd be out at like social events and things like that, and then somebody would realize that I was the editor-in-chief. Like, it was such an interesting year in my life for that, because people like, and people have so many opinions, whether it's like the frat guys or the athletes or the people from the freaking Koala, the satirical newspaper. Like, so many people have opinions, and so many of them were rooted in things that maybe were not true, or like not reflective of the work that we had done, just kind of reflective of rumors and things. Navigating all of that all year was very interesting, but I'm really happy that I got to do it.
Yeah, one of my other biggest takeaways from my year as editor-in-chief, and this was at the very end of the semester, and again, this goes to, you get recognized because your picture is in the paper, and I'm getting a sandwich, and the guy who's making my sandwich, he says, hey, you're the editor-in-chief of the Daily Aztec, right? And I said, yeah. And he started to tell me the story about how there was a classified ad in the Daily Aztec that promised a whole bunch of scholarships. And so, and again, this is before email was really a thing. So he writes a check and sends something off in the mail because he saw something in the classified section, and he never got anything back at all. And he thought that it was a scam, and he told me about it, and he was more venting more than anything else. And then I started to look into it, and it was the final story that I ever did for the Daily Aztec. And as it turned out, this company had terrible record with the Better Business Bureau, and they were doing this at other campus newspapers throughout the state of California. And I wrote one story about it. And then the next thing you know, my phone, this was still a landline, just started blowing up with more and more people who are calling me and coming forward. And as it turned out, there was over 30 different students who all fell for this scam. Then I remember I started calling like the Daily Bruin at UCLA and like other campus newspapers and asking them, hey, does this company advertise in your classifieds? And sure enough, they did. And it started to make me realize, oh my goodness, the scope of this story of this scholarship matching service, which is a scam, or it's just very, very minor what they can actually do, and the amount of money that's being made by them. And it all started because the guy behind the sandwich counter recognized me from my picture in the Daily Aztec.
Oh, that's awesome. That kind of thing is so, like, it's in a weird way. It's like, damn, like I wish that this wasn't happening. This is horrible. Somebody needs to say something. But it's like, also, thank God you were there to be able to look into that and say something about it. Because that's like, that has like an actual impact on people's lives and pocketbooks, right? Like,
so you were a political science major in journalism. Was this just because you're this overachiever? Was it because you thought that you were going to end up with something that where you could balance both of them? Tell us about why you did it and how it's helped you to this day.
I think that I was drawn to the politics stuff. Like, nobody in my mom and dad aren't particularly political or anything, but my grandmother was. And I think that I would help her clean houses growing up, and she would like complain to me about politics. And I feel like it kind of like introduced me to that. And so I was always like a little bit interested in that kind of thing, and wanted to learn more. I knew I wanted to kind of go like the social studies, humanities route. So that was in there. But I guess there's a little bit of overachiever, because the only way I was really able to pull that off in 4 years was because I had a bunch of AP classes that I did in high school. So I started technically as a sophomore. And so I had the flexibility. It wasn't like I was doing an absurd amount of units every semester. Like, I had the flexibility to do both. And the journalism degree requires you to take a certain number of units outside of your major, like a pretty substantial amount. And that was fulfilled by having a second major. So it worked out really well, I would say. And my job now is very political. I feel like I need to have a knowledge of journalism things. Obviously, I'm writing all the time, but the politics stuff is where I feel like I'm like constantly learning, because when we were covering the midterm elections last year, we interviewed as an editorial board people. We interviewed so many candidates. And as an editorial board, it's not like you're a beat reporter where you have like one beat that you like are really knowledgeable about. Like one day we could be talking about some like niche water project in San Diego. Next day we're talking about like Biden border policies. Next day we're talking about something that Newsom did. Like we're talking about all levels of government, all issues. You kind of have to be a little bit of an expert on all of them at any given moment, or at least have the skills to be able to like research and like develop an understanding and opinion on things. And so the political science stuff, I think, has helped me a lot. And now, yeah, I like, it's weird because I work in journalism, but I feel like I work in politics. I mean, I work in both, but it's a very political job at the end of the day.
All right. So I want to talk more about your current job, but first, I always want to give students as much assistance in learning about how jobs were obtained. And so give us the background of how you got the job, so there's something that students can learn about how I can potentially get a job like this or a similar job.
Yeah, so I'll just start from the beginning. I feel like I got a head start in my journalism career just in general when I started working at KPBS. I got a job at KPBS this summer going into my sophomore year, which is pretty early. And it wasn't really a journalism job. I was editing the events calendar, and editing I use pretty loosely. I kind of went hard on the editing, I would say, like harder than I needed to, but like that's what I was doing. I did that for a while, and I feel like that really helped like give me a good basis to like start doing internships, because I was like, I did a lot of internships. I worked at the Daily Aztec. I was a news editor and then the editor in chief. I did an internship at iNewsSource doing investigative stuff. Then I did the internship for the Union-Tribune that was also on the watchdog team. And that was the fall of my senior year. I was at the Union-Tribune, and that kind of got my foot in the door there. And I got a lot of help, obviously, by doing work for the student newspaper, doing work for iNewsSource, and like having KPBS. Like I already kind of had a pretty good resume at that point, because I had started so early. So that would be like a good piece of advice, is just like anything you can do, even if it's like not explicitly journalism, to kind of start writing and editing, or even just like, it was a lot of like web production stuff, I think really helped me get ahead early. So I interned at the Union-Tribune, interned at Voice of San Diego. That was the COVID semester. And then things got a little bit weird after graduation, because I graduated into COVID. Everybody had a hiring freeze. It was crazy. I worked at a restaurant for a while, which was like crazy because restaurants were not in a good place during that time. Dangerous, like genuinely dangerous. But that's what I was doing. And I got a call from iNewsSource, asked me to come back and do web production stuff for them and social media stuff. So that's kind of how I started doing the social media thing, which wasn't something that I really wanted to do, frankly. I kind of fell into it, but I think that I ended up in the right place. Like it makes sense for me. Did that, was freelancing for Voice of San Diego again, like still doing journalism, but kind of like when I was working at iNewsSource after graduation, it wasn't exactly full time. So I kind of had my hands in a lot of things freelancing. I was like freelancing for a bunch of other random local publications throughout all of this too, like some publications in Script Ranch and North County, just like writing a lot, even if it's stuff that's not sexy, just like little community stories. And then when it came to the Union-Tribune, that was about a year and a half, a little bit less than a year and a half after I graduated. The job was community opinion editor, I believe was the job. And when I applied, I had met Matt Hall before, who became my editor and who hired me by attending SPJ events. So I'm involved with SPJ still and highly recommend going to those kinds of things. I had met him at a resume editing workshop, but he had mentioned in my job interview that he knew me from Twitter. So being annoying on Twitter can pay off if you do it right, I think. But he was a really big Twitter guy at the time. So like, maybe it depends. But he really liked my cover letter. I put a lot of effort into my cover letter, and I had a lot of like friends who in journalism read over it for me. And so definitely using your network in those kinds of situations, because I feel like the cover letter is so important for journalism jobs. It's like the first proof that you like know how to string a sentence together. So that really helped, but it ended up actually, they kind of shifted the job for me because I talked so much about social media in my interview and in my cover letter that it was originally going to be more of a traditional editing role. But now it turned into more of like an opinion, social media, community engagement role because of kind of what I was bringing to the table. And then it's evolved continuously since. Now I do a lot more editing, like copy editing, headline writing, web production, TikToking, and editorial board stuff. That's more or less everything. Events organizing, like all kinds of stuff. But it was a long road to get here. But I think that they really appreciated that I had like the investigative background. Like I knew how to do journalism, I knew how to write, and then having this like social media mindset, like really they embraced that a lot. And so I think that I ended up in the right place, but it was a journey for sure. I think all of those things were important in getting here. So that's the long story, the long version.
Okay, I love the long version. For current students who want to learn, it's okay if you want to pause and rewind this podcast, however long back it was when Bella started talking, because there were so many incredible pieces of wonderful advice in there. SPJ, having a presence on social media without being too annoying, writing a fantastic cover letter, having other people look over the cover letter, just the quantity of work that you did and kind of just not being bored and feeling sorry for yourself and just constantly just going after story after story after story from a variety of publications. I salute you. And again, for students, that is like one of the greatest answers I've ever heard, because that's what it takes. And it's not an easy road. You don't just like click the button on LinkedIn that says one click apply and then hope that someone calls you and offers you the job. It is a relentless pursuit to get these tough jobs.
Oh yeah. And like, that's why I went all the way back to like freshman year working for KPBS, because like it all started there. I wouldn't have been able to do 3 internships in college if I hadn't started so soon. And I understand that it's like, it's difficult. Like, you know, a lot of it, I think more internships are starting to pay. And fortunately, all the ones that I did were paid. But there's a lot of unpaid internships. Not everybody really has the means to be able to commit themselves to those kinds of opportunities that can really help you get ahead. But I would just say take anything. I mean, like I was willing to try a lot of things, even if they weren't necessarily directly what I thought I wanted to do in the long run. I applied for TV jobs. I did some interviews with TV stations. I knew that I didn't want to be on camera. Sure enough, I'm on camera now in some capacity, but you know, it's all part of the journey. But as you know, take the different skills, see what happens. I don't necessarily see myself writing for these like small publications in the long term, but it gave me like a really good grasp on community reporting and like doing these smaller stories and seeing the impact. So just like trying stuff, even if it's not for like a journalism organization, just like, you know, a lot of what I do now is like really similar to like stuff that's done in like marketing agencies and like marketing roles. And like my job isn't necessarily a marketing role, but it isn't not a marketing role. I could have easily taken jobs that were more similar to that on top of my journalism experience and ended up in the same place that I am in now. So I don't know, having an open mind, I think, is super important.
Well, I think it's super important that the San Diego Union-Tribune has hired you or people similar to you, because they need to find a way to engage younger audiences so that they don't lose any more. I'm curious about the editorial board, and I feel bad in thinking this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just assuming that you're the youngest. If you just graduated a few years ago, I'm kind of assuming that everybody who's on the editorial board is even older than me, and so it can be maybe a very stuffy, older type of crowd. But I'm curious your role and kind of how you can bring a different perspective based on your experiences to the editorial board.
Yeah, I'm definitely the youngest by like at least 15 years, but like more for most of them. And I love my coworkers. Like they're all lovely people. And I'm so happy that I've been able to be in this role and learn from them. Like we all learn from each other. I learned from their institutional knowledge and, you know, experience, and they get to learn about, you know, all the cool kid stuff that that's going on in the world. But, you know, the more new age stuff that like we all learn from each other. And it's like, it's such a valuable space to be able to work in and exist in. But I feel like I politically, I bring diversity to the board. We all have different things that we like care about. I would say that like, on the board, like we aren't all equally versed in everything. We each kind of have our issues that we are more passionate about. And I think it's taken the past, like I'm coming up on 2 years in this role this month. I guess it's November now, but in a couple of weeks, it'll be 2 years. It takes a while to kind of find your footing and figure out like, what are the issues I really care about that I really feel like I can move the needle on and kind of become a little bit of an expert on. And I feel like I've kind of found those issues over time, and they often are issues that matter to young people, like talking about like housing and transit and homelessness and climate and things like that. Like those are things that I really care about, that my coworkers care about too, but I feel like that's where I can really like change the conversation. And then aside from that, I've been able to use it as a platform too, to do a little bit of my own writing, which it was not fully in the job description that you're going to be like doing columns or anything like that. But I've definitely had opportunities to do some of those things, and like bringing a younger perspective to the board. I did like a essay recently about like the housing outlook for Gen Z and millennials. And I think that was really exciting for a lot of people to see, just because the people who are often writing about the housing outlook for Gen Z and millennials are not Gen Z or millennials. And so having that like lived experience that is missing in a lot of these institutions because they don't have as many young people, being able to bring that to the board, I think has been super valuable for everybody involved.
Yeah, that was a really good commentary that you had. I remember reading that recently, and it made me stop to kind of do the math myself about, okay, my parents were this age when they bought this house here, and then they were this age when they bought their second house. And then I was able to track down what they paid for it. And even accounting for inflation, I'm blown away at it's like 10 times the value now. And I'm thinking, how is it that anyone is supposed to kind of get ahead, or not even get ahead, but just do the same thing as their parents did? And like, even as someone who's much older than you, I still like that resonated with me. Like that hit home about once I started to do the math on my own parents' age and their buying history, and then where that's at now, it was like, oh my gosh, this is even worse than I thought it was.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, so much has changed socially too. Like, I think that I wrote that, and I think the impression it kind of gave people was that I want to buy a house and I can't. And right, like, I really am not that interested in buying a house right now. But also, it kind of becomes a situation where it's like, is that because I just realized that it's so unattainable that I've just like shaped all my life goals and like values kind of around like what's reasonable for me? Or is it just because I genuinely don't? And I think like I'm not in a rush, but also like thinking about like I love San Diego. So much of why I do want to do journalism is because I care about San Diego and being a part of this community and kind of taking care of it like through this work. And I want to stay here. I want to be able to do journalism in San Diego. And like the long-term outlook for that is really grim for a lot of reasons. And housing is definitely one of them. And so it's really difficult to think about, but I think that I'm in a good position right now, and hopefully we'll be able to stay here. But San Diego media is struggling a little bit at the moment. So
there was something else that you wrote, and it was older. It's older now. It's about 2 years or so old. And it was a story about a woman who stole the San Diego Tribune paper so that she could get the classifieds. And then 30 years later, she wrote an apology that she was stealing the newspaper and included a check to pay for it. And I mean, that story was so touching on so many levels. I forgot about it until I recently stumbled upon it again. And so I'm wondering if you can give us more of just the background on that story comes to you, and then how you as a newspaper decide that we are going to share this story in the proper way.
yeah, that was a really interesting one. That's a deep cut. I haven't thought of that since in a really long time, because you said it's been almost 2 years. That was really championed by Christy Totten, who I think was also on there, and Matt Hall. I think Matt had received the letter, and it was a little bit controversial. Like, it's like, why are we applauding this woman having to like send us back? Not having, but sending back this check when she was clearly struggling, and like turning it into this story about forgiveness and all of these things. Like, I don't know, like it's kind of a grim story when you like really think about it. But I thought that it was really interesting and heartwarming, kind of just to see that it had been on her conscience for all of these years, which is horrible, but that it was on her conscience so much that she like felt like there was something that she needed to do about it. And like, it kind of just like makes us reflect on like, I guess the things that we've done throughout our lives. And to like hear about her situation, like living out of her car, I think she had a kid too, and just doing whatever she could to support her family. And I think that it's like really easy to kind of like villainize people like that. You know, somebody who would like steal a newspaper, but peeling back the curtain and seeing all that context, like you can't help but be sympathetic for this person. And then also like what they do 30 years later, sending a check, like, I don't know. I thought it was a heartwarming story. And I'm really happy that we were able to highlight it, because easily that could have been something where you just receive a letter and kind of nod and it was sweet and you talk about it amongst the newsroom and then you don't think about it again. But I think those kinds of stories really resonate with people, and our section in particular, opinion, I feel like is a good space to be able to like do kind of non-traditional stuff and highlight those kinds of things. I believe we had her on a podcast where she talked about it in a little bit more length with Chrissy Totten, who used to be on the editorial board with us. And that's something I feel like we've really embraced in the opinion section, is being able to just like kind of try things and like be a little bit of experimental. So that's like one of the reasons why I'm super fortunate that I ended up in this space.
Yeah, let me piggyback on that a little bit more, because, and this might be kind of an inside writing thing, but how would you describe the difference between just a straight column, like this is just what I think, versus a commentary, you know, versus maybe more like a news analysis? Because I feel like each of those are a little bit different. Most of the public, especially those who did not study journalism, are going to have no concept of the difference. But for you and your coworkers, just the balance you want to have between kind of standing up on a soapbox saying, I believe this, versus no, this is a commentary about something that's happening in the world.
Mm-hmm. So I think that we, at least at the Union-Tribune, and I think that a lot of publications use these terms in different ways. There is not, as much as we like try to be definitional about it, I think that there's just, at the end of the day, so much diversity in how these terms are used. So, but the way that we use it at the UT and the way that I think about it is the columns are for staff. So if I write something, it's a column. And I think historically, like that has not always been the case. Like a column, I mean, the nature of the word column is a column in a newspaper, a regular space that a staff writer is using to write about whatever their beat is. But for us, because times have changed, whenever a staff member writes something, we're considering it a column. And I mean, the staff members get a little bit of leeway. There's not like a ton of us, but the staff members could just be something that we're passionate about, have a little bit more expertise about, or have lived experience. I think there is a lot of lived experience in there. That's basically how we're using those. The commentaries are generally from members of the community, and that's kind of similar. We do try to emphasize a lot of lived experience. That is like my favorite essays and commentaries I use interchangeably. Those are my favorite commentaries and essays are from people who have lived experience. Like we ran one today about a woman who experienced homelessness in San Diego in some of her interactions with police. And that kind of stuff I think is so important, because there's so many people talking about homelessness all the time, and very few of them have actually experienced homelessness. A lot of speaking for homeless people. And so I think that our paper is like, our section is a really good space to do that, because even in a traditional news story, the journalist is more or less speaking for somebody else. And in opinion, they're fully speaking for themselves, because even for quoting somebody, we're choosing what quotes we want to use and then fitting it into whatever narrative that we're writing, which is important. Like that is definitely has its place and is very important. But the opinion section like really allows somebody to just say what they need to say. And I think that that's really awesome. And then a news analysis, I think, can be less opinion. Like it definitely rides the line between opinion and news. And I think that that's a really important space right now, because I think there's so much noise in media and news that I think people kind of are attracted to stuff that kind of tells them how to feel about all of it, because it's so hard to like comprehend. You couldn't possibly read everything on one issue to like form an informed opinion. So I think that news analysis and perspective and that kind of thing is like really growing in a space that like news organizations need to tap into and be less afraid of. And I think that a lot of news organizations are afraid of things that can be perceived as opinion. But yeah, just taking the time, I think, a news analysis to like cut through the noise, maybe say the quiet part loudly is a phrase that I like to use for this kind of thing. Where sure, like maybe there's a little bit of opinion, but it's pretty expert and it's maybe not pushing a certain perspective necessarily like a column or a commentary might, where it's like, this is how you have to feel. It's more, I feel like this is what's happening. And I think that those things are distinct and both have their places in the media landscape.
Okay, we're going to start to wrap things up here with Bella, but before we move on to the end, I just want to kind of give you the floor in case there's something else about your time at San Diego State. There's other bits of wisdom that you want to impart to students or kind of just get across about, again, whether it's your time at San Diego State, whether it's your time at the UT that I should have asked that I have not asked by now.
I think the thing that I always tell to like graduating students, just in terms of general wisdom, is I think that there was this perception, and I definitely experienced this, that you have to have a job right out of college or else you've failed. And you get to the end of college and you see everybody getting jobs, and especially in journalism, it's so hard to get jobs. Like even the best, like, not to say that I'm like the best of the best. It took me 1.5 years to get like my first like full-time job. People were always telling me like, you're going to get a job right out of college. Like, don't worry about it. Like, and I graduated into a pandemic and I thought my life was over because nobody was hiring. And I thought that I was going to be screwed and I thought that I was so behind. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important to kind of step back, especially after being in school for so many years, and just take some time. I think that like, I spent a year or so working at a restaurant, just kind of like freelancing in an alternate universe where there wasn't a pandemic happening. I would have loved to have traveled and maybe use that time to like get a little bit more experience other than, being a hostess and watching Netflix. But at the end of the day, it's a drop in the bucket. You'll get around to it at some point. And I think that kind of experience like really helps us figure out like what's going to make us happy. And for me, I think I really thought that I wanted to do like a traditional reporting job. And in that time, I was able to realize that what I've ended up in now, the opinion, the social media stuff was the better fit for me. And I'm happier because of it. And so I think there's just a lot of pressure. So much of like the job searching experience is like the comparing yourself to other people and seeing people post up on Twitter about these amazing jobs that you applied for and you never heard anything, and getting ghosted by employers and all of that. And all that sucks so bad. But you just have to try to keep your head up and keep writing if you can. And if you have to do something else for a little bit, it'll be fine in the end. So yeah, that was a lot of my experience. And I hope that people going through it can get out the other end okay.
I think that is outstanding advice and experience. And I would echo what Bella just said. Okay, one of the things we like to do here as we wrap up each episode is to brag about other San Diego State alums, whether it's someone you know or don't know. You can brag about as many as you want. I'm sure there's a lot of SDSU alums in the newsroom and then that are your friends, Bella. So whoever you want to brag about, go for it.
I'm ready. I think you've interviewed this person, but very timely would be Jack Molmud, who is currently living in Maine, which is a weird choice, I will say. It is strange for me to have a friend on the furthest part of the country from where we are at now. But currently covering the shooting that happened in Maine over the weekend, or about last week, watching him doing the TV spots in the middle of the night, talking to people who lost family members. That's such a sensitive and horrific incident, and seeing him out there covering it so diligently has been really encouraging for journalism. Obviously, the situation is really horrible, but I'm glad that he was the one who was able to do it, because I can tell that he's doing it right and really taking on an important local perspective on what has become a national news story. So I love to see friends who are able to take on those kinds of stories with care and really apply their journalism skills and do it right. And so that's been really awesome to witness. I also have deep love and admiration for Lauren J. Mapp, who works with me at the San Diego Union-Tribune. She currently has every beat under the sun. She's covering Indigenous communities, caregiving, and all of East San Diego County. And so That obviously is not an ideal situation, but she is such a fantastic writer. And I think she brings a really, really important perspective and skills to the Union-Tribune. And I'm glad that she's there and working in San Diego. And every time I get to read one of her stories or hang out with her and listen to her, it's just awesome. She's one of my favorite people. And so there are many, many more, but I'm going to stop it at that because I could brag all day.
I love it. Let me just follow up about Jack. The follow-up stories that he is doing, because I also follow him on social media and I've been reading and watching his stuff, and his reporting on how could this have been prevented and the background of what we knew and what didn't happen as a result of it. What he did in breaking news was impressive, and I think his follow-up stories have been even more impressive about how he is telling the story. The important follow-up aspects to the story have just been really impressive by Jack.
Oh, for sure. And like, that's the kind of thing that you're not getting from the national news. They parachute in when something horrible happens, and then something horrible happens somewhere else, and they parachute elsewhere. And then the community is left to deal with the repercussions of that. Like, I think about stuff that's happened in San Diego years ago that's never talked about in the national news because there's just so much. They couldn't possibly still talk about it. But the community is still reeling. And that's going to be the same situation with what Jack is dealing with over in Maine. This is, it's the long game. You got to be there. Like, he's the one who's there after all the cameras leave and keeps talking about it. And that's really the important work. And that's where the change happens, hopefully.
All right. For my alum that I want to brag about, I want to keep it with the theme of Daily Aztec Editor-in-Chiefs. I am going to spotlight Dawn Brooks. She is the one who followed me. She was initially in the journalism communications world. At one point, she owned her own company for almost 14 years, where she was a professional copy editor. She edited books, fiction, nonfiction, thesis papers, you name it. She did that for a long time. Now she has moved on to the risk management world. She works for CyberSource. She's been there for about 6 years. And she's had a lot of different experiences over her time. But I remember getting to know Dawn when she first started at the Aztec, and then she took my place. And I remember it was always an exciting time because my year was the first time that we got stories online. That goes to show how old I am. That was the first year we got stories online, and we were still 5 days a week. And yes, we did still pay every writer back then. Not much, but everyone got paid a little bit. And so I've just always been a great admirer of what Dawn does with her life and her career since then. So way to go, Dawn. All right, Bella, thank you so much for being generous with your time and all of your outstanding wisdom and your stories about what you're doing. Continue to make us proud. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Once again, that is Bella Ross from the San Diego Union-Tribune. My name is Josh Suchon. I'm your host. We appreciate you listening to the Where You At podcast, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person, or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.